The message did not come from the sky. It came from inside it. At 0317 UTC, every satellite in Earth's orbit changed position simultaneously. Not drifted, not adjusted, moved. Thousands of machines, military, civilian, scientific, shifted into a perfect geometric formation no human agency had commanded. For exactly 2.3 seconds, global communication went silent. Then, the signal began. I was asleep when it happened. My name is Elias Varm, astrophysicist, systems analyst, consultant for problems governments pretend don't exist. At least, that's what I was before that morning. The walls of my apartment lit up first, then my watch, then my phone, then, judging by the glow bleeding through the curtains, the entire city. I knew something was wrong before I even opened my eyes, because everything was synchronized, perfectly, artificially. When I stepped into the living room, the world was already watching. Every screen displayed the same image, Earth, but not as we knew it. It wasn't the familiar blue marble. It was framed, encircled, marked. 17 objects hovered in orbit, far beyond any altitude we could reach, too large for stations, too still for ships, too precise for anything natural. They formed a ring around the planet, not aggressive, not defensive, possessive. Then the voice spoke. Not loud, not threatening, just certain. Civilization of Earth, you have been observed. No static, no delay, no distortion. Perfect audio, perfect translation. It continued, in English first, then seamlessly cycling through every major language. You exist within a monitored sector governed by the collective accord of advanced civilizations. I remember the way my hands felt. Cold, not shaking, just cold. You exhibit technological advancement warranting intervention. There it was. Not discovery, not contact, intervention. I muted nothing. I didn't move. I just listened. Your species demonstrates patterns consistent with uncontrolled expansion, internal conflict, and unpredictable technological escalation. A pause, not for effect, for assessment. You are classified as a Tier 6 volatility risk. I exhaled slowly. They had a system. Of course they did. You will comply with the following transition protocols: immediate cessation of all military operations, transfer of orbital and planetary control, submission to oversight governance. Then came the line that changed everything. This process has been successfully applied to 39 civilizations. Not conquered, not destroyed, processed. I remember thinking one thing, not fear, not panic, just a simple, clinical realization. We were not special. The message ended with a time limit. You have 48 hours to acknowledge compliance. And then, silence. Not just on the screens, in the world. Later, people would argue about how long that silence lasted. Some said seconds, some said minutes. But I know the truth, because I was counting. It lasted exactly 5 seconds. And in those 5 seconds, humanity decided something. Because what came next was not chaos, it was not riots, it was not collapse. It was something far more dangerous. Focus. Within 20 minutes, every major government had issued the same statement. We are assessing the situation. Within 40 minutes, military networks went dark, not offline, hidden. Within an hour, the United Nations called an emergency assembly, and I got a call. Elias, the voice said, we need you in Geneva, now. I didn't ask why. People like me don't get called unless the answer is already bad.
The streets were full, but not panicked. People were talking, arguing, thinking. A man outside a cafe said something I will never forget. If they've done this 39 times, they're expecting the same result. The woman next to him replied, then maybe we shouldn't give it to them. That was the moment I understood, not emotionally, strategically. They had a model, and models only work until they don't. The UN chamber was already overflowing when I arrived. Leaders, scientists, military advisors, and something new, something I had never seen in that room before. Agreement. Not complete, not perfect, but fast. Faster than any decision humanity had ever made at that scale. Because the real question wasn't, can we win? It was, do we accept this? And for the first time in recorded history, humanity answered quickly, no. The room didn't erupt. There was no applause, no speeches, just a quiet collective understanding. We were about to test something no one had ever tested before. Not our weapons, not our technology, ourselves. Because out there, 17 ships waited, silent, patient, confident. They had seen 39 civilizations surrender. They had never seen one refuse. And in that moment, neither had we.
The reply was sent exactly 3 hours and 12 minutes after the broadcast. Not rushed, not delayed, measured. I was in the secondary communications chamber when it happened. Not the main hall, too visible, too political. This room was different, smaller, reinforced, built for decisions that didn't need applause. There were only 12 of us inside. Heads of state weren't present. They didn't need to be, because this wasn't a political response anymore. It was something older, something simpler. Survival. The transmission officer looked at me. You're certain about the wording? No, I wasn't. But that didn't matter, because certainty wasn't what this moment required. Clarity was. Send it, I said. The signal went out across every frequency we had. Radio, satellite, deep space arrays, even experimental channels we weren't entirely sure worked. If they were watching, and we knew they would hear it. The message was only 7 words long. Earth acknowledges. Earth declines compliance. No threats, no demands, no negotiations. Just refusal. The room went silent. Again, that same silence from before. Heavy, not empty, loaded. Then the screens changed. The 17 ships moved. Not aggressively, not suddenly, but undeniably. They shifted formation from a perfect ring into something else. A pattern. I didn't recognize it at first. None of us did. But one of the analysts whispered it before anyone else could. It's not a formation, she said. It's a calculation. Lines formed between the ships, invisible at first, then faintly glowing. A network, a lattice. They weren't positioning for attack. They were mapping us. Every satellite, every signal, every piece of infrastructure. And then they began to learn faster. Within minutes, things started failing. Not catastrophically, not violently, just precisely. Power grids flickered, not off, just unstable. GPS drifted by meters, then kilometers. Military targeting systems began returning impossible coordinates. They weren't destroying anything. They were touching everything, testing, probing, understanding. Can we stop this? Someone asked. No one answered, because we all knew the truth. We couldn't stop them. But that didn't mean we were helpless. Bring up the deep network, I said. A pause. Then the technician hesitated. That system isn't officially... I know what it isn't, I cut in. Bring it up
anyway. There are things governments build, and then there are things humanity builds quietly. After the first signs we weren't alone, years ago, signals buried in cosmic noise, some of us started asking a different question. Not, are they out there, but what happens when they arrive? The answer wasn't weapons, not at first. It was redundancy, decentralization, distributed systems, independent nodes, a network with no center, no single point of failure. Because if something smarter than you shows up, you don't try to outmatch it, you make yourself impossible to shut down. The deep network came online in layers, not all at once, never all at once. Hidden satellites activated, old infrastructure woke up, decommissioned systems long thought dead started responding. The aliens had mapped our visible world. Now they were seeing the rest. And for the first time, one of the 17 ships hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. They didn't expect this, the analyst said quietly. No, they didn't, because every civilization they had encountered before had a center, a command, a hierarchy, something you could pressure, something you could break. We didn't. Not anymore. The first real escalation came from them. One ship, just one, broke formation. It moved closer, closer than the others. Lunar orbit. It stopped there, perfectly still. Then it did something new. It spoke again, not to everyone, to us. A direct channel opened in the chamber, unfiltered, unmediated. The voice was different this time, still calm, still controlled, but no longer certain. Clarification requested. That alone sent a ripple through the room. They weren't issuing orders, they were asking questions. Proceed, I said. A pause, shorter than before. Your response indicates refusal. Your actions indicate preparation. Another pause. This combination has not been observed in prior engagements. I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it confirmed everything. Their model was breaking. You expected us to comply, I said. Yes, no hesitation, no denial. Statistical probability exceeds 99.7%. Then your data is incomplete. Another pause, longer this time. Explain. I leaned forward slightly, and for the first time since this began, I chose my words not as a scientist, not as an advisor, but as a human. You've been watching us, I said, studying us, measuring our conflicts, our technologies, our patterns. I let that settle. But you missed something. Silence. Not theirs, ours. Because everyone in that room knew what I was about to say. You think survival is our highest priority. It isn't. A flicker across the screens. Not visual, not physical, but something changed. Clarify. We value survival, I said, but not at any cost. I thought about the people outside, the cafe, the streets, the calm. There are lines we don't cross. I paused. And if those lines are threatened, we don't calculate. Silence. Real silence this time. Then, for the first time, the voice changed. Not in tone, not in structure, in weight. I understand, it said slowly. No, it didn't. Not yet, but it was starting to. The ship in lunar orbit powered down its lattice connections. Just that one. The other 16 continued, still mapping, still learning, but this one was thinking. We require reassessment, it said. There it was, the crack, the first deviation from certainty. You have 48 hours, I replied, same as us. A pause. Then, acknowledged. The channel closed. No one spoke for several seconds. Then the analyst whispered, "They're not advancing." Another voice, "They're not retreating either." I nodded slowly. Of course not. Because now, for the first time, they weren't sure what to do. And uncertainty is where humans are most dangerous.
The first shot was not fired in anger. It was fired in curiosity. 6 hours after the second transmission, the ship in lunar orbit moved again. Not toward Earth, not away from it, sideways. A slow, deliberate drift across the dark, as if it were choosing. "What is it doing?" someone asked. No one answered, because we were all watching the same thing. It wasn't targeting cities, it wasn't scanning military bases. It was moving towards something much smaller, a cluster of satellites. Old ones, outdated, officially listed as solar observation debris, unofficially something else. "Deep Network Node 7, the technician whispered. Of course it was. If they were mapping us, they had found a seam, and now they were pulling on it. "Do we disengage it?" the technician asked. "No," I said immediately. "Too fast, too sharp." Every eye in the room turned to me. "If we shut it down," I said, forcing my voice steady, "we confirm it matters." "And if we don't?" someone pressed. I looked at the screen, at the alien ship drifting closer. "Then we learn what they do when they think it doesn't." The ship stopped 300 kilometers from the cluster. Perfect distance, precise, calculated. Then something extended from its surface. Not a weapon, not visibly. A field. Space itself seemed to bend. Light warped. Signals twisted. The satellites in the cluster flickered. Signal interference spiking. Power fluctuations. They're inside the system. Not hacking, not attacking, examining. And then something unexpected happened. The cluster responded. It wasn't supposed to. Those satellites were old, disconnected, passive. But suddenly, they weren't. "They're activating," the technician said, disbelief creeping into his voice. One by one, systems came online. Not broadcasting, not transmitting, reconfiguring. The alien field intensified. The ship adjusted position slightly, closer than before, testing limits. "Still no weapons?" someone said. "Not yet," I replied, because I understood something now. This wasn't an attack, this was a question, and they were about to see our answer. The first human strike didn't look like a strike. There was no missile, no beam, no explosion, just silence. Then, every satellite in that cluster emitted a synchronized pulse, invisible, undetectable to the eye, but devastating in effect. The alien ship stuttered. Just for a moment, a flicker across its surface, a distortion in the field. Signal spiking detected. No, not energy. Signal, you. Even our instruments struggled to define it, because what we sent wasn't force, it was information, a cascade, a flood, a storm of structured data, mathematical, recursive, self-modifying, not random, designed. "They're trying to compensate," the analyst said. On screen, the alien field shifted, adapted, but the pulses kept coming, faster, denser. The ship pulled back slightly, not retreating, reconsidering. "Damage?" someone asked. "No physical damage detected," the technician said. But then he hesitated. "Their systems," he swallowed. "They're slowing down." That was the moment everything changed, because until now, they had been faster, smarter, untouchable, and for the first time, they weren't. The ship tried something new. The field collapsed inward, then expanded violently outward, a shock wave, not explosive, but disruptive. Every satellite in the cluster went dark, instantly, cleanly. "They're gone," the technician said.
The room fell silent. We had struck first, and they had answered. But then something impossible happened. One satellite came back online, then another, then all of them, not rebooting, adapting. They're changing their signal structure, the analyst said, voice rising. They're evolving. Of course they were, because we hadn't built a weapon, we had built a system that could learn, and now it was learning faster than the enemy expected. The alien ship pulled back, further this time, its field flickering, not failing, but unstable. Then, for the first time, it retreated. Not a dramatic withdrawal, not a panicked escape, just a smooth, controlled movement back toward the outer formation. But everyone in that room knew what it meant. They disengaged, someone whispered. No, I shook my head slowly. They lost the exchange. The silence that followed was different. Not fear, not tension, something else, something dangerous. Hope. But hope can be a mistake, and I knew that better than anyone, because as the ship rejoined the others, the formation changed again. This time, not a lattice, not a network, a line. 17 ships, aligned, facing Earth. No movement, no signal, no voice, just presence. They're done testing, the analyst said quietly. I didn't answer, because I was watching something else. The space behind them, where new distortions were forming. Small at first, barely visible, then growing. They're calling reinforcements, someone said. I exhaled slowly. Of course they were, because now this wasn't a procedure anymore. It was a problem, and for the first time in their history, humanity had become one.
The reinforcements did not arrive all at once. That would have been easier to understand, easier to fear. Instead, they slipped into existence. One distortion became 3, 3 became 9, 9 became too many to count cleanly. Space behind the original 17 ships folded inward like fabric being pinched, then unfolded into something new. Ships. Bigger. Different. Not identical to the first wave, which meant something important. These weren't standard units. These were responses. The updated count appeared on the tactical display. 42. The room went very still. No one spoke numbers out loud after that, because saying them made them real. They escalated, the analyst said quietly. No, I replied. I didn't take my eyes off the screen. They adapted. The new ships didn't form a ring. They didn't form a line. They formed layers, depth, defense and offense at once. And right at the center, the original lunar orbit ship, the one that had spoken to us, the one that had hesitated. They're reorganizing command, someone said. Yes, I said, and they've decided we matter. The next message didn't come through public channels. It came directly to us again. But this time, the delay was shorter, the tone sharper. Humanity, your actions have altered engagement classification. No people of Earth, no formalities, just direct address. You are no longer considered a passive transition candidate. A pause. You are now classified as an active variable. That sent a ripple through the room. Not fear, recognition. We had crossed a line, and so had they. What does that mean? The technician whispered. I answered without looking away from the screen. It means they don't know how this ends. The voice continued. Further resistance will result in enforced containment. There it was. Not destruction, not annihilation. Containment. They still didn't want to destroy us, which meant something critical. They couldn't. Not without cost.
Respond? The officer asked. I shook my head. No. That surprised them. Why not? Because words had done their job. Now only actions mattered. And the next action was ours. Activate outer layer, I said. There was a hesitation, not because they didn't understand the command, but because of what it meant. Are you sure? The analyst asked. No, I said honestly. Do it anyway. Across the solar system, things began to wake up. Not near Earth, not near Mars. Further, much further. Beyond Jupiter, beyond Saturn, out in the cold, dark regions where humanity had never officially built anything important. But we had. Mining arrays, research stations, long-range relays. All quiet, all forgotten, all waiting. They're coming online, the technician said, voice barely above a whisper. Dozens, then hundreds, then something else, something larger. Those aren't stations, the analyst said. No, they weren't. They were structures, massive, dormant, hidden in plain sight for decades under the label of infrastructure. What are those? Someone asked. I finally allowed myself a small breath. They're options. The alien fleet reacted immediately. Of course they did. Sensors shifted, formations adjusted. They were tracking the new activity, recalculating. For the first time, they were the ones trying to catch up. The first outer structure moved, slowly, deliberately, not toward Earth, toward them. Distance didn't matter, not anymore. Velocity readings don't make sense. They're not accelerating. Then how are they moving? I didn't answer, because the truth was, we didn't fully understand it either. That was the point. The alien fleet tightened formation, layer upon layer, defensive now, cautious. And then, for the first time, one of their ships fired. It wasn't aimed at Earth. It was aimed at the approaching structure. A beam, clean, focused, absolute. It crossed millions of kilometers in an instant. Impact. Silence. The structure didn't break. It didn't explode. It didn't even slow down. It absorbed it. Not with shields, not visibly, but completely. They just lost that exchange, the analyst whispered. No, this time they knew it too. The fleet shifted again. Not aggressive, not advancing, pulling back just slightly, but enough. And in that movement, in that tiny, almost invisible adjustment, something passed between both sides. Understanding. We weren't just resisting anymore. We were unknown. And for a civilization built on prediction, that was the most dangerous thing in existence. The channel opened again. No delay this time. No translation lag. Humanity. The voice paused, searching for something it had never needed before. What are you? The room was silent, all eyes on me. I looked at the fleet, at the structures, at the impossible situation we had created. Then I answered, something you didn't model. Silence. Long. Heavy. Then, for the first time, the voice changed again. Not calm, not controlled. Careful. We require reconsideration. I nodded slightly. Good, I said, because now they weren't trying to conquer us. They were trying to understand us. And that meant we had already won the first battle.
The galaxy did not change in a moment. It changed in a pause. After my answer, after I said something you didn't model, the alien fleet did something no one in that room expected. They went still.
Not holding position, not preparing to strike, just still. 42 ships, machines beyond our understanding, a force that had never been resisted. And they stopped. Minutes passed, no signals, no movement. Then something even stranger happened. The outer structures we had activated stopped too. The entire solar system, human, alien, everything, paused. "What's happening?" someone whispered. I didn't answer because I recognized it. After a lifetime of negotiations, you learn to recognize one thing above all else: deliberation. "They're talking to each other," I said quietly. The channel reopened, but not like before. This time, it wasn't one voice. It was many, layered, harmonized, different tones merging into something unified. "Humanity, your classification is under revision. No threats, no commands, just assessment. Your species demonstrates instability, but also resilience beyond projected models." A pause. "Your response patterns indicate non-compliance with standard predictive frameworks." I almost smiled. Of course we did. Then came the question, the real one. What outcome do you seek? The room shifted. This was it. Not survival, not resistance, definition. I stepped forward slightly, and for the first time since this began, I didn't think about strategy. I thought about us. "We're not asking to defeat you," I said. Silence. "We're not trying to replace you." Another pause. "We're asking for something simpler." I looked at the fleet, at the impossible scale of it, at everything they represented. A choice. The word hung there, heavy. "You've decided for 39 civilizations," I continued. "You brought them stability, order, survival." I nodded once. "That matters." Then I let the next words land exactly where they needed to. But it wasn't their choice anymore. Silence. Not empty. Listening. "We don't reject you," I said. That surprised them. I could feel it. "We reject the idea that our future is decided without us." Another long pause. Then a different voice emerged from the collective, softer, older. "And if your choice leads to destruction," I didn't hesitate, "then it will be our mistake," I said. The silence that followed was the longest yet, because that answer didn't fit their system. For them, mistakes were to be prevented, controlled, eliminated. For us, they were something else. "We learn from them," I said quietly. Time passed, seconds, minutes. No one moved, no one spoke. Then the fleet changed, not formation, posture. The layers softened, the alignment loosened, weapons, if that's what they were, powered down, and the central ship, the one that had first spoken to us, moved forward again, closer than before, but this time not as a threat, as a presence. The voice returned, single again, focused. "Humanity, your request is unprecedented." I nodded. "So is refusing you." A pause. Then, agreed. The word hit the room like gravity shifting. "The collective accord does not impose membership." Another pause. "It offers it." No one breathed. "Humanity is hereby invited to enter negotiations as an independent civilization." And just like that, the war that never fully began ended. The ships didn't leave immediately. That would have been dramatic, clean. This wasn't. Instead, they repositioned from a line to something else. Not a ring, not containment, distance, respect. In the days that followed, everything changed, but not the way people expected. There was no sudden unity, no perfect cooperation. We argued, Of course we did. About terms, about risks, about trust, because we were still human. But now we were arguing about something new, our place not just on Earth, but beyond it. The first human delegation left the solar system 11 days later. I was on it, along with scientists, diplomats, engineers, and one civilian observer, a baker. No one questioned it, because by then we all understood. Humanity isn't defined by its power or its technology, but by something much harder to measure. The quiet decision to stand, even when every calculation says you shouldn't. As our ship crossed the edge of the system, I looked back at Earth, small, bright, still turning, and I thought about those first 5 seconds of silence, the moment everything could have gone differently, the moment we chose not to kneel. Ahead of us, the alien fleet waited, not as conquerors, but as something else, something new, partners. And for the first time in human history, the unknown wasn't something we feared, it was something we were walking towards.